Plead guilty, you ungrateful bitch. You were just a stray dog I picked up to make my real daughter look good. The second the judge hands down your life sentence, I will make the call and pull the plug on old Arthur myself. That was the hiss slipping through Martha's teeth, the woman I called mother for 20 years, right in the middle of the courtroom. She had just stepped down from the witness stand where she sobbed and swore she saw me sell out national defense secrets. With one fabricated testimony from my adoptive mother, Leslie Silva was stripped of my uniform, my bank accounts were frozen, and I stared down the barrel of a treason charge. Standing at the defendant's table, I watched her hug her biological daughter with a sickening smirk, waiting for the judge to drop the gavel and end my life. I did not shed a single tear. I looked down at the ironclad evidence binder the prosecution had built. They thought they had backed a useless orphan into a corner. They forgot this adopted daughter was a top-tier legal analyst. They had no idea I only needed exactly 10 minutes and 2 fatal flaws to send this entire bloodline to prison. I let a small smirk touch my lips and tapped my fingers against the oak table exactly 3 times. Your Honor, I am ready to begin the hunt. But right now, let us step back to see how this death sentence began. 3 weeks before the trial, the cheap plywood door of apartment 4B exploded off its hinges. Splinters of dry, rotting wood rained over the scuffed linoleum floor. 4 men in heavy black jackets surged into the cramped living room. No badges were flashed, no warnings were shouted. I did not scream. Survival instinct took over, cold and absolute. I dropped my knees to the freezing floor, lacing my fingers behind my neck. Flashlight beams cut aggressively through the dark washing over the peeling yellow wallpaper. Rough, calloused hands grabbed my upper arms, hauling me to my feet before slamming my face against the drywall. Cold, heavy metal bit deep into my wrists. The cuffs clicked shut tight enough to grind against the bone. The man holding me against the wall grabbed the fabric of my nightshirt. With one violent jerk, he ripped the rank insignia clean off my shoulder. The sound of tearing cotton echoed through the freezing Virginia night. Sharp, brutal, final. A second man stepped out of the shadows. He tossed a thick, heavy binder onto my dining table, a wobbly wooden thing I had dragged home from a Sunday flea market. The binder landed with a loud thud right next to a plastic jar of Folgers instant coffee and a disorganized stack of unpaid utility bills. Hardware contracts. $3 million redirected into offshore accounts. You hit it well. The man muttered, his breath smelling of stale coffee. I turned my head to look at the binder. Heavy stock paper, polished gold-plated paper clips. That was high-end stationery. The kind of supplies you only ever saw sitting on the mahogany desks inside the Silva family estate. I bit down hard on the inside of my cheek. The metallic taste of warm blood flooded my tongue. The glaring contrast between that luxurious stack of lies and my rotting, drafty apartment told the whole story. This was a staged execution funded by old money. They dragged me out into the hallway. The brutal winter wind slapped my face the second we hit the street. Just beyond the harsh glare of the streetlights, a black Mercedes sat idling at the curb. The exhaust plumed into the freezing air. The passenger window was rolled halfway down. Martha sat in the heated leather seat, slowly dragging on a cigarette. The cherry burned bright red in the dark. Chloe rested her chin on her mother's shoulder, staring at me through the cracked window. There was no panic on their faces, no shock, just the dead cold stares of people watching a television show they had already written. My mind clicked. The security token, the heavy steel safe back at the house. I had trusted my adoptive mother with the only physical key while I traveled out of state for work. She had not just held onto it, she had turned it into the weapon that would bury me alive. The men shoved me toward the back of a heavy transport van. As the man reached up to grab the handle and slammed the heavy metal doors shut, the yellow street lamp caught his wrist. A watch slipped out from under his dark sleeve. A Rolex. Blue bezel. My brain snapped a picture of it. It was a limited edition. Just last month, my brother-in-law Luciano had flashed that exact same watch over a Sunday roast, bragging about how much it cost him. Luciano bought the men who were putting me in chains. The heavy doors slammed shut, plunging me into pitch black. The engine roared to life, vibrating through the metal floorboards. I closed my eyes in the dark, forcing my breathing into a rigid pattern. 4 seconds in, 4 seconds hold, 4 seconds out. Luciano was a coward. He did not strike on a random Tuesday. He waited. He waited for the exact moment my only shield was ripped away. The rumble of the tires on the asphalt faded as my memory snapped back to a sterile hospital room exactly 3 days ago. The wail of the ambulance siren still rattled in my skull. I stood frozen in the freezing hallway of the intensive care unit. The sharp, chemical stench of hospital bleach burned the back of my throat, mixing with the stale taste of cheap vending machine coffee on my tongue. Through the heavy soundproof glass, Arthur lay completely still. My adoptive father. The only person in the Silva house who ever looked at me like a human being. Now thick plastic tubes snaked out of his mouth. Wires crisscrossed his bare sunken chest. A massive heart attack. The doctor said he was in a deep coma. He was not waking up anytime soon. I pressed my palm flat against the cold glass. The condensation left a faint print. The timing of it all. It was just too perfect. For 15 years, Arthur gave me a name. Martha and Chloe just gave me a debt I could never pay off. I spent years eating dirt overseas, sleeping on cheap canvas cots in 100-degree weather, chewing on dry vacuum-sealed protein blocks that tasted like cardboard and chalk just to save every extra dollar. Every cent of my hardship pay went straight into the joint family account. I bled for that money. I traded my youth for it. Last month, I finally found out where it went. Chloe bought a cherry red Porsche convertible. I remembered standing in their massive kitchen staring at the bank statement on the granite island. Martha was leaning against the counter, smelling of heavy designer perfume, swirling a glass of expensive Merlot. She needs to network Leslie. Martha had said, her voice dripping with extreme annoyance, like I was a beggar asking for spare change. She has a social circle to maintain. You sleep in a dirt hole half the year. What do you even need cash for? I did not scream. I did not throw the paper at her face. I just stood perfectly straight, my hands balled into tight fists at my sides, and absorbed the insult. The pathetic silence of an orphan who still thought she owed them her life. But this current nightmare was not just about a sports car. This was about the piece of paper sitting inside Arthur's desk. A month ago, the smell of stale cigars and old paper hung heavy in his study. He slid a thick document across the leather desk pad. A drafted will. This family needs integrity, not vanity. Arthur had told me, his eyes dead serious. The estate goes to you, Leslie. You earned it. But his heart gave out before the public notary could stamp it. An unsigned will is just a useless piece of paper. If Arthur died, the entire fortune defaulted to Martha by law. But if I was still around, I could contest it. I knew the ledgers. I knew the offshore account numbers. I was a threat, unless I was locked in a federal penitentiary for the rest of my life. Standing in the harsh, fluorescent light of the ICU, the math finally clicked in my head. They did not just want to steal the estate, they needed to completely erase me to do it. The second Arthur's heart stopped, my only shield shattered. Luciano and Martha made their move. They used my own hardship money to buy the rope, and now they were wrapping it tight around my neck. If you have ever been used as a human ATM by the people who were supposed to protect you, hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and comment, "I survived," below. Let me know I am not sitting in this dark room alone. The mechanical hiss of the ventilator rhythmically pumped air into Arthur's lungs, a slow, lifeless sound echoing through the glass. I looked at the weak rise and fall of his chest one last time. My eyes stopped stinging. The deep, heavy sadness rotting in my gut instantly evaporated, replaced by something entirely different. Cold, hard iron. I slowly peeled my hand off the glass. I did not wait for Martha and Chloe to show up and cry their fake tears for the nurses. I turned my back on the ICU room and walked down the long, empty corridor. My heavy boots clicked against the linoleum, slow, steady, and razor-sharp. I drained every last cent of my retirement fund just to make bail. The morning wind bit violently into my face as I stood outside the legal department building. I pulled my jacket tighter and swiped my access card at the main gate. A hard, solid beep. Red light. Denied. People I had worked next to for 5 years hurried past me, keeping their eyes glued to the freezing concrete. Nobody said a word. Margaret Whitfield, the head of my department, was standing inside the heated lobby. We made direct eye contact through the glass. She did not flinch. She did not offer a nod of pity. She just turned her back, stepped into the elevator, and let the heavy steel doors snap shut. Just like that, they cut the infection out. I was completely, utterly alone. I rented a filthy hourly motel room on the edge of town, far away from the polished neighborhoods. The air inside the room was thick, smelling of wet mold, cheap bleach, and stale beer soaked deep into the carpet. The first thing I did was buy 3 rolls of thick gray duct tape. I ripped strips off with my teeth, the harsh adhesive sticking to my lips, and pasted old newspapers over the cracked windows to block out the streetlights. I turned the peeling drywall into a timeline. Cheap printer paper, red markers. I had no access to the internal servers anymore. The system had locked me out. So I closed my eyes and dragged every single digit, every offshore routing number, and every buried contract straight out of my own head. My memory does not forget what it reads. I wrote until the red ink bled through the paper. I drew heavy, aggressive lines connecting the bloodsuckers, Luciano, Martha, Chloe, and the corrupt prosecutor Sterling. 48 hours without closing my eyes. I sat on the edge of a sagging mattress covered in cigarette burns, slowly chewing on a dry vacuum-sealed protein block. I had to force myself to chew just to keep my blood sugar from crashing. It tasted like drywall and chalk. It was the only meal I could afford. I looked down at my hands. The fluorescent tube light above me buzzed loudly, flickering and casting a sickly pale glow over the tiny white scars across my knuckles. These fingers used to strip down heavy metal hardware in the pitch black without making a single sound. Now they were shaking. It was a pathetic, uncontrollable tremor born from stress, hunger, and severe caffeine withdrawal. Martha and Chloe were probably sleeping on $1,000 silk sheets right now, entirely unbothered, while I sat in a rotting room. I had spent my entire adult life protecting a nation, obeying the rules, playing the good daughter. But tonight I did not have enough cash left in my pocket to hire a bottom-barrel defense lawyer to save my own neck. 3 in the morning, I dropped the red marker. It rolled off the desk and hit the floor. My forehead rested against the rotting wood of the cheap desk. The timeline on the wall was full, but the most important piece was completely blank. The origin point of the forged signature, the one missing link that proved the $3 million contract was a fake. If I did not find it by sunrise, the judge would bury me alive in a federal cell. The heavy, suffocating weight of physical exhaustion finally crushed my chest, pinning me to the chair. I closed my eyes and let my breathing slow down, accepting the quiet dark. Then a sound cut through this dead silence. 3 slow knocks on the thin wooden door. Firm, deliberate. My eyes snapped open. The exhaustion vanished instantly, replaced by cold, hard survival instinct. I grabbed a heavy steel pen off the desk, sliding silently out of the chair without letting the springs squeak. I pressed my spine flat against the peeling wallpaper beside the door frame, gripping the pen like a spike. I held my breath, waiting for the wood to splinter. Instead, a small folded slip of white paper slid through the dirty gap under the door. I pressed my spine flat against the peeling wallpaper, waiting for the wood to splinter. Nothing. Just the heavy silence of the cheap motel. My boot nudged the folded slip of white paper away from the doorframe before I crouched down to pick it up. Blue ink scratched out fast. Walter Hayes. 412 Sycamore, keypad lock. There was no signature, but the heavy, aggressive underline beneath the last letter gave it away. Margaret Whitfield. The same woman who looked the other way by the elevators had just slid a lifeline under my rotting door. I crushed the paper in my fist. I did not have the luxury of holding a grudge. The cracked screen of my phone glowed in the dark. 4. Rosaler a.m. Court started at 9. I swallowed the last dry bite of my protein block and grabbed my cheap blazer off the dirty floor. 9:15 a.m. Courtroom number 4. The morning recess dragged on, suffocating under the weight of old money. I sat entirely alone at the defense table. Luciano Sutton casually strolled past my chair, holding a large steaming paper cup. With a perfectly calculated stumble, he pitched his weight forward. Pitch black, scalding coffee splashed directly across my chest. The boiling liquid soaked instantly through the thin fabric of my blazer, searing the skin on my collarbone. I clenched my jaw so hard my teeth ground together. Luciano planted his heavy hands flat on my oak table, leaning in close. He smelled like expensive cologne and sheer arrogance. "Start packing up your trash," he whispered, his voice a low, raspy threat. "Tomorrow, when the judge puts you away, I will make the call to pull the plug on old Arthur myself." I did not gasp. I did not frantically wipe at the dripping mess on my shirt. I sat perfectly straight, pressing the hard heels of my shoes together under the table to anchor myself. I looked past his smug face, scanning the room. Judge Vance kept his eyes glued to a legal pad, pretending he did not just watch a physical assault. Martha casually pulled a silver compact from her leather purse, popping it open to touch up her red lipstick. Chloe hid a sharp, nasty smirk behind her manicured hand. The absolute silence of the room was sickening. The wealthy and the powerful happily turning a blind eye while their hired dog kicked me in the teeth. I held Luciano's gaze unblinking until he finally broke eye contact and backed away. I stood up, my posture rigid, and walked toward the heavy wooden doors. The fluorescent lights in the public restroom buzzed with a headache-inducing hum. The air smelled of harsh urinal cakes and industrial bleach. I stood in front of the stained mirror, watching the dark brown liquid drip off my lapel. My hands gripped the edges of the porcelain sink, the cold creeping into my knuckles. The door creaked open. An old man pushed a rusted yellow mop bucket inside. Henry Walker, the janitor. He wore faded blue coveralls and worn-out work boots. He stopped. His eyes drifted to my ruined jacket, then down to my scuffed shoes. No fake pity, no pointless questions. He reached into his deep pocket and pulled out a folded white cotton handkerchief. Stitched in the corner was a faded eagle globe and anchor. A silent nod between two people who knew exactly what it felt like to bleed in the dirt for a country that easily forgot them. He held it out. I took it. The fabric was rough, washed 100 times over, but perfectly clean. I walked back into the courtroom. I did not button my coat to hide the wet stain. I sat back down in my wooden chair, keeping my spine straight. I took Henry's white handkerchief, smoothed out every single crease with my thumbs, and laid it perfectly flat on the dark oak table right next to my empty legal pad. A quiet, unyielding flag of defiance. At that exact second, the heavy double doors at the back of the courtroom swung violently open. Sterling, the lead prosecutor, marched down the center aisle, hugging a massive 200-page stack of fresh documents tightly against his chest. The heavy double doors shut. The sound echoed like a gunshot. Sterling, the lead prosecutor, walked straight to my table. He did not say a word. He just lifted a massive 200-page stack of paper and let it drop. Thud. The thick stack of dense technical analysis hit the heavy oak table. Dust motes danced in the pale fluorescent light above us. This was a classic paper ambush. Bury the defense in garbage right before the buzzer so they drowned trying to read it. Sterling buttoned his suit jacket, turned to the bench, and demanded a life sentence. He claimed every single financial wire matched my private security code perfectly. I looked up. Judge Vance was already nodding. The subtle, knowing glance exchanged between the judge and the prosecutor was quick, but I caught it. They were in on it together. The system was rigged from the inside out. Behind them, sitting in the front gallery row, my family put on their show. Martha stared blankly at her glowing phone screen beneath the bench, checking her emails like she was waiting for a delayed flight. Beside her, Chloe pulled out a glass nail file. The sharp, abrasive rasp of her filing her nails cut through the quiet courtroom. They were supposed to be the grieving, betrayed family. Instead, their body language screamed the lazy arrogance of scavengers just waiting to divide the meat. I pushed my chair back. The wooden legs scraped loudly against the polished floor. I stood perfectly straight, my voice completely devoid of panic. "Your Honor, per federal guidelines, the defense has the right to request a 24-hour recess to bring in an independent forensic expert to review this new 200-page file." Judge Vance did not even look up from his notepad. He reached out and grabbed his wooden gavel. Crack! "Denied!" Vance said, his tone flat and heavily irritated. "The guilt is obvious. This system will not waste another second on a traitor. This court will hand down a final ruling tomorrow morning at 10 o'clock sharp. The heavy metal trapdoor just swung shut beneath my feet. Every single legal door was welded shut. Below the judge's bench, Nathaniel Brooks, the aging court clerk, suddenly stopped typing on his stenographer machine. His hands hovered over the keys. He looked up at Vance, then slowly turned his head to look at me, standing completely alone at the defense table. He did not say a word. He reached into his bottom drawer, pulled out a worn black moleskin notebook, and flipped to page 144. He picked up his pen and pressed down so hard the ink carved a deep groove into the paper, quietly documenting the absolute corruption happening right in front of him. If you have ever watched The People You Trust twist the rules just to break you down, hit that like button, subscribe, and comment "rigged" below. Let me know I am not the only one who has had to fight a stacked deck. I did not argue with the judge. I did not beg. I simply reached out and pulled the 200-page ambush toward me. I packed the heavy stack of lies into my cheap briefcase and snapped the brass locks shut. If the law was broken, I would have to use the laws of the street. My eyes shifted toward the frost-covered windows of the courtroom. The winter sky outside was turning a dark, bruised purple. Tomorrow at 10 in the morning, they were going to put me in a cage for the rest of my life. I had less than 18 hours to tear their perfect lie to shreds. I picked up my briefcase and walked out of the courtroom, my mind locking onto a single target. 412. Sycamore. 2 in the morning. I drove a beat-up rental car straight through the freezing Virginia rain. The worn-out windshield wipers violently slapped back and forth, smearing the water instead of clearing it. I gripped the cheap plastic steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. My mind was not on the cold. It was tearing apart the structure of that 200-page ambush. Luciano was too arrogant. He used a mountain of dense technical paperwork to scare me. He forgot that before I was the family punching bag, I was the top hardware contract analyst in my department. The car tires crunched to a stop on gravel outside a weathered cabin. 412 Sycamore. I cut the engine and stepped out into the freezing rain. My breath plumed in thick white clouds. I walked up to the rotting wooden porch and pounded my fist against the door. 3 heavy hits. The door opened instantly. Walter Hayes stood in the doorway wearing a frayed wool sweater. His right hand was tucked behind his back, fingers wrapped around the grip of a heavy handgun. His eyes darted past me, scanning the empty, dark road. The eyes of a man who spent his whole life hunting liars. "Ms. Silva," he said, his voice a gravelly rasp. He lowered the gun. "Margaret said you were coming. I owe your father a debt from a very old world. Come in." He locked the heavy deadbolt behind us and led me down the narrow, creaking stairs into the basement. The air down here was thick and heavy. It smelled like old paper dust, ozone, and burnt black coffee sitting on a hot plate. Entire racks of outdated roaring servers lined the concrete walls. The cooling fans buzzed so loud it vibrated in my chest. There was no time for small talk. I threw my briefcase onto his rusted metal desk and snapped the brass locks open. I pulled out the heavy stack of fake documents and slammed them flat under the glaring desk lamp. "They used my digital signature to approve the V7 project," I said, pointing a finger directly at the stamped ink on page 1. "I need you to pull the central government server logs and match the IP addresses." Walter did not ask questions. He pulled out a metal folding chair and sat down in front of a massive, bulky CRT monitor. His thick, calloused fingers hammered away at the mechanical keyboard. Clack, clack, clack. The heavy glass screen flickered, casting a sickly pale blue light across the dark room. The blue glare reflected perfectly in my unblinking eyes. Luciano and Martha had built their entire trap using raw emotion and public humiliation. I was going to gut them using math and logic. Lines of raw code began bleeding down the screen like a waterfall. I leaned over Walter's shoulder, my eyes scanning the endless rows of green numbers flying past. The burning smell of the coffee pot filled my nose. "Stop," I said, my voice dead flat. I planted my hand flat on the desk, pressing my index finger against the glass of the monitor, right on a specific 12-digit hardware serial number. Walter hit the enter key. The system locked onto the number, violently tearing through the cloud server archives to find a match. A small gray results window popped up on the screen. Walter stopped typing. He slowly turned his head to look at me, his bushy gray eyebrows pulling together in a tight, confused knot. I stared down at the screen. My breathing stopped entirely. My heart slammed hard against my ribs. The arrogant fools had left muddy footprints all over a bright white floor. I tapped my index finger hard against the glowing glass of the monitor. "Look at this authorizing signature right here," I said, my voice dead flat. "Mr. Cornelius, the senior project supervisor." Walter typed a string of commands accessing the federal fatality records. The screen refreshed. A bright red ink-stamped graphic appeared next to a black and white ID photo. Deceased. Cornelius died in a blast overseas. Walter muttered, his eyes narrowing at the date. 6 full months before the date stamped on your supposed contract. A dead man cannot sign federal hardware approvals. Luciano was lazy. He threw cash at a black market broker to buy a stolen digital signature account, but he never bothered to check if the original owner was still breathing. That was flaw number 1. "Keep scrolling," I said, my eyes never leaving the screen. "Check the activation log for the V7 satellite code." The mechanical keyboard clacked loudly in the damp basement. A new schedule loaded. Walter picked up his chipped ceramic mug, taking a slow sip of the burnt coffee. V7 was completely offline when this contract was supposedly drafted. The hardware did not even boot up until 18 months later. 2 massive glaring holes. Dead men signing documents and hardware traveling back in time. Luciano and Sterling were blinded by their own arrogance. They honestly thought the sheer weight of a 200-page paper ambush would crush me. They figured a disgraced penniless orphan standing alone in a courtroom would just break down, cry, and take a plea deal. They never expected me to read the fine print in the dark. The fake evidence they used to bury me was actually a handwritten confession to their own federal crimes. Walter reached for the heavy black rotary phone on the corner of his desk. "I am calling the central inspector. We shut this down right now." "No." I reached out and pressed my hand down on the receiver, holding the phone in its cradle. For the first time since my front door was kicked off its hinges, a genuine smirk pulled at the corner of my mouth. A cold, hard smile. "If we call the authorities tonight, they will stall," I told him, keeping my voice low. "Sterling will bury the files. Luciano will buy some poor idiot off the street to act as the fall guy. They will slip right through the cracks." I let go of the phone and pushed the heavy stack of fake documents across the metal desk. "Make physical copies of the raw server logs. Imprint them with the federal notary seal. Let them walk into that courtroom tomorrow morning and build their own gallows in front of an audience." Walter looked at me for a long, quiet second. He gave a single firm nod. He hit a button on his desk. In the corner of the basement, an ancient dot matrix printer shrieked to life. The high-pitched screeching sound of the needle violently punching ink into the paper filled the room. The noise was deafening. I stood by the machine, ripping the perforated edges off the fresh pages as they fed through. I grabbed a heavy metal stapler off the desk. Clack. The sound of the thick metal staple punching through the paper was deeply satisfying. I packed the newly certified documents into my cheap briefcase, sliding them right next to Luciano's 200-page lie. I snapped the brass locks shut. I walked up the creaking wooden stairs and pushed the heavy front door open. The freezing rain had finally stopped. A pale, bruised gray dawn was just starting to break over the bare trees of Virginia. I tossed the briefcase into the passenger seat of my rental car and slid behind the steering wheel. I adjusted the rearview mirror, looking at my own reflection. No tears, no exhaustion, just a dead-eyed focus. The clock on the dashboard flashed 8:30 a.m. It was time to go hunting. 9 o'clock in the morning. The heavy oak doors of the courtroom swung shut. Sterling stood up from the prosecution table, aggressively adjusting his crisp white collar. He looked over at me with pure disgust. "Your Honor, the defense has provided zero pushback." Sterling announced, his voice echoing off the high ceilings. "We request immediate sentencing, maximum penalty." In the front row of the gallery, Martha and Chloe leaned into each other. Chloe whispered something behind her hand. Martha let out a quiet, sharp laugh. They were already celebrating my funeral. Judge Vance nodded, reaching for his wooden gavel. I stood up. The wooden legs of my chair scraped loudly against the polished floor. I placed both hands flat on the table, keeping my spine perfectly straight. Your Honor, I said, my voice cutting through the room like shattered glass. Before we close, I am exercising my constitutional right to cross-examine Prosecutor Sterling and Mr. Luciano Sutton regarding Exhibit A. Vance frowned. The deep wrinkles on his forehead pinched together in heavy irritation. He sighed, waving his hand to allow it. It was just a dying dog's last twitch to him. Sterling practically stomped up to the witness stand. He gripped the wooden railing, a tiny bead of sweat forming at the edge of his hairline. He tried to project absolute authority, but his knuckles were white. I did not walk around the table. I just stared a hole straight through him. My voice was low, slow, and completely empty of emotion. Mr. Sterling, I said, hitting every single syllable. Do you swear under oath that Exhibit A is the original document, completely unaltered and 100% accurate in its timeline? Sterling leaned into the microphone. Absolutely. It is flawless. Below the bench, Nathaniel Brooks's fingers flew across the stenographer machine. Clack, clack, clack. The lie was now officially burned into the federal record. Thank you, I said softly. Mr. Sutton, your turn. Luciano swaggered up the center aisle. He took the stand, casually unbuttoning his expensive suit jacket before sitting down. He smelled like heavy designer cologne trying to cover up stale whiskey from the night before. He looked down at me and flashed a sick, arrogant smile. I repeated the exact same question. Luciano let out a loud, mocking laugh. He pointed a finger straight to my face. There is not a single mistake in that file. You did this, Leslie. Just accept it. He said the words out loud, under oath. I shifted my eyes past Luciano, looking all the way to the very last row of the public benches. Walter Hayes sat quietly in the shadows. The old man met my eyes and gave one single slow nod. The heavy steel doors of the trap had just slammed shut. Luciano and Sterling thought they were nailing the lid on my coffin. They did not realize they had just walked right into a federal perjury trap. They swore on the legal record that a document signed by a dead man was authentic. There was no walking it back now. The rope was tied tightly around their own necks. If you know exactly how satisfying it feels to sit back and watch a toxic, arrogant person destroy their own life with their own lies, hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and comment. Checkmate below. We all love watching karma do the heavy lifting. Judge Vance, completely unaware of the explosive bomb sitting directly under his courtroom, picked up his wooden gavel. Crack! We will take a 30-minute recess before I hand down the final sentence, Vance declared, pushing his chair back. The room erupted into quiet chatter. I did not look at my adoptive mother. I did not look at the judge. I just reached down slowly, packing my blank notepad into my briefcase. The storm clouds were pitch black, hanging heavy directly over their heads. And the lightning was about to strike in the hallway. The courthouse hallway was freezing. Pale morning light filtered through the high windows, reflecting off the polished marble floors. The heavy double doors of the courtroom shut behind me. Before I could even take 3 steps toward the drinking fountain, they cornered me. Martha, Chloe, and Luciano moved in tight, completely blocking the narrow corridor. The fake tears they shed inside the courtroom vanished instantly. The masks dropped. The absolute rot of this family stood right in front of me, breathing heavy, aggressive breaths. Martha stepped up first. She grabbed my upper arm. Her acrylic nails dug sharply through my thin jacket. What kind of stunt was that in there? She hissed, her voice vibrating with pure rage. Small drops of spit flew from her lips. Plead guilty right now, you stupid bitch. If you drag this out one more hour, I will personally call the chief of medicine and pull the plug on old Arthur. I will let him choke to death in that bed. Chloe stood right behind her mother, crossing her arms tightly over her chest. The sharp clack-clack of her stiletto heels echoed loudly against the marble. Just go to prison quietly, Leslie, Chloe said, flashing a dark, smug smile. If you do what you are told, the estate stays intact. If you fight us, you lose everything, including him. Luciano shifted his weight, puffing out his chest. He reached his thick hand out, aiming right for the lapel of my jacket. I will crush you, he threatened, his voice a low growl. Go back in there and confess. You are just a stray dog we brought inside. Do not try to bite the hand that feeds you. They were completely convinced they had me beaten. They honestly believed Arthur's life was the ultimate leverage. They thought the guilt of being an orphan would force me to swallow their poison one last time. My heart felt like it was trapped in a vice, but I did not cry. I did not shake. I looked down at Martha's manicured hand gripping my jacket. I slowly reached up, wrapping my fingers around her wrist. I squeezed hard. The bones in her arm popped quietly under my grip. I shoved her hand away with one violent motion, like I was scraping filthy algae off my boot. She stumbled backward, her mouth falling open in shock. I stepped forward. I did not back down a single inch. I moved directly into Luciano's personal space. The rigid, unyielding posture of someone who spent years staring straight into the worst parts of the world took over. My eyes locked onto his. The absolute dead cold stillness in my gaze was completely unnatural. Luciano hesitated. His eyes darted nervously. He actually took a half step back. I carry the Silva name, I said. My voice was not loud. It was a razor-thin whisper, sharp enough to cut bone. Not because of the rotten parasitic blood running through your veins. I carry it because of the honor attached to the man lying in that hospital bed. I watched the color drain completely out of Martha's face. She finally realized the stray dog was not wearing a collar anymore. You really thought you could break me with cheap blackmail? I tilted my head, studying their panicked faces one last time. Listen closely. You three just dug your own graves. I turned my back on them. I did not wait for a response. I walked straight toward the heavy wooden doors of the courtroom. The gavel was waiting. The guillotine was sharp. I grabbed the brass handles and pulled the heavy doors open. As I stepped back inside to face the judge, the solid oak doors slammed shut behind me. The heavy booming sound echoed through the entire building, dropping down exactly like the lid of a coffin closing on the Silva estate. The heavy courtroom clock clicked to 10:23 a.m. I stood up, holding the freshly stamped files. Your Honor, the defense calls Walter Hayes to the stand. Walter walked down the center aisle. He wore a faded, stiff suit, moving with the heavy, unyielding authority of a man who did not tolerate games. He took his seat. Mr. Hayes, I said, my voice carrying over the silent room, please read the certified logs for Defense Exhibit 1. Walter put on his reading glasses. The signature on the prosecution's main contract belongs to a Mr. Cornelius. Federal fatality records confirm this man died in an overseas blast exactly 6 months before this document was supposedly signed. The gallery erupted into loud murmurs. Sterling's expensive fountain pen slipped from his sweating fingers. It hit the hardwood floor and rolled under the table. I did not give them a single second to breathe. Exhibit 2. I said, holding up the second sheet. The V7 hardware activation code. Government servers confirm the system did not even boot up until 18 full months after the date on their forged paperwork. Judge Vance gripped the edge of his bench. The blood drained from his face, leaving his skin a sickly ash gray. I reached into my briefcase and pulled out the final folder. I tossed it onto the center table. The heavy thud echoed loudly. And here are the offshore routing numbers proving Luciano Sutton directly paid off Prosecutor Sterling to build this fake case. I said, staring straight at the judge. Both men just swore under oath that a physically impossible document was completely real. I demand an immediate dismissal and federal arrests for perjury. The courtroom exploded. Vance slammed his wooden gavel over and over, completely panicked, but the noise drowned him out. Federal guards surged through the side doors. They grabbed Luciano by the collar of his tailored jacket and slammed him face first onto the polished floor. Sterling tried to back away, but a heavy hand grabbed his shoulder, forcing him down. The sharp, metallic click-click of heavy handcuffs echoed over the shouting. Martha shrieked. It was a raw, ugly sound. She clawed at her own hair, her perfect composure entirely shattered. Beside her, Chloe sobbed hysterically, her expensive acrylic nails digging into her cheeks. The reality just hit them. They were not getting the estate, they were getting federal prison cells. Down below the bench, Nathaniel Brooks quietly closed his black moleskin notebook. He stood up and handed all 144 pages directly to the federal oversight officials flooding into the room. I snapped my briefcase shut. I walked up the center aisle, leaving the garbage behind me. By the heavy double doors, Henry Walker stood perfectly straight. The old janitor looked at me and offered a silent, deeply respectful salute. I gave him a single nod and walked out. Late that afternoon, the harsh hospital smell of the ICU faded under the warm golden sunlight, cutting through the window blinds. I walked into the quiet room, wearing my dark formal uniform. The mechanical ventilator hissed. The heart monitor beeped in a slow, fragile rhythm. I stepped up to the bed. I reached into my pocket, pulled out my cold silver identification tags, and placed them gently onto Arthur's chest. "I kept our honor safe, Dad," I whispered, my voice finally cracking. "Nobody can hurt us anymore." I reached out and wrapped my hands around his thin, fragile fingers. The room was perfectly still. Then just beneath my thumb, his index finger twitched. The green line on the monitor spiked. The slow fading beep suddenly caught a new steady rhythm, growing louder and stronger with every passing second. The long freezing night was finally over, and the sun was shining on a brand new day. Thank you so much for following this journey with me, and from the bottom of my heart, I wish you all peace and strength until we meet again in the next story.